As you prepare to rest, let us travel together to a world of distant shores, winding hills, and stories that echo across more than 2 millennia. Tonight, we will drift gently into the history of Homer and ancient Greece, a tale that combines myth and memory, poetry and politics, culture and continuity. This is not only the story of one man, whether real or legendary, but also the story of an entire civilization whose ideas still ripple through our world today. Ancient Greece is a land of contrasts. It is made up of rocky coasts and fertile valleys, of islands scattered across the Aegean Sea, of small communities that somehow shaped the destiny of the Western world. Here, life is defined by both the sea and the land. Farmers cultivate olives, grapes, and grains, while sailors set out in narrow wooden ships to fish, to trade, and to explore. In villages and towns, daily life is simple yet deeply intertwined with religion, storytelling, and civic tradition. Out of these rhythms arises a culture that values memory, performance, and the spoken word, an environment where a poet like Homer can emerge. Homer is remembered as the author of two of the greatest epics of all time, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These works are not only cornerstones of literature, they are also cultural anchors, preserving myths of heroes and gods and shaping Greek identity for centuries to come. Yet Homer himself is elusive. Ancient accounts describe him as a wandering bard, blind and gifted, reciting long verses that had been passed from mouth to mouth for generations. His name may represent not a single man, but a tradition of oral poetry, crystallized into texts sometime in the 8th or 7th century BCE. This mystery is part of Homer's enduring fascination. He is at once an individual and a symbol of a collective memory. To understand Homer, we must also understand the world that gave birth to him, the Greek Dark Age that followed the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. After palaces and kingdoms fell around 1200 BCE, Greece entered a period of reduced population, simpler material culture, and loss of writing. Yet within these centuries of apparent decline, oral tradition flourished. Storytellers, known as bards or auidoi, kept alive the tales of heroes like Achilles and Odysseus, weaving together fragments of myth, memory, and local lore. These performances were not entertainment alone. They were acts of cultural survival, ensuring that the past lived on in the minds of each new generation. By the time writing returned to Greece, using an adapted version of the Phoenician alphabet, these oral poems had already matured into complex epics. They were eventually written down, giving us the texts we know today. The Iliad, set during the Trojan War, recounts the wrath of Achilles and the struggles of warriors before the walls of Troy. The Odyssey tells of Odysseus's long journey home, filled with storms, monsters, and divine interventions. Both works explore timeless themes: the nature of heroism, the bonds of family, the role of the gods, and the fragility of human life. The influence of Homer in ancient Greece cannot be overstated. His epics became a kind of educational foundation, texts that every literate Greek encountered, and stories that every citizen knew. They shaped the values of honor, bravery, cunning, and endurance. They provided a shared cultural language, uniting communities that were otherwise scattered across seas and mountains. To the Greeks, Homer was not only a poet, he was a teacher of ethics, politics, and faith. At the same time, Homer's Greece was a society in transition. The epics describe a world of bronze weapons, chariot warfare, and heroic duels. Yet they were told in a time when iron tools and more complex political structures were emerging. They bridge myth and history, reflecting memories of a Mycenaean past, while also speaking to the realities of the early Archaic period. In this sense, the Homeric poems are like a mirror, showing us both the remembered past and the imagined ideals of a society still defining itself. As we drift further into this story, we will explore not only Homer's epics, but also the broader history of ancient Greece. We will look at the rise of the city-state, or Polis, and the flowering of democracy in Athens. We will travel through the landscapes of Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. We will visit sanctuaries such as Delphi and Olympia, where faith and competition intertwined. We will listen to the voices of philosophers, dramatists, and historians who followed in Homer's wake, building on his foundation while shaping new ways of thought. The legacy of Homer in Greece extends far beyond antiquity. Medieval scholars preserved his works, Renaissance thinkers celebrated his genius, and modern readers continue to find meaning in his verses. His words echo in classrooms, in libraries, in art, and even in popular culture today. To read Homer is to connect not only with the past, but also with the enduring human search for meaning, belonging, and beauty. As you settle into rest, imagine the soft rhythm of waves along the Aegean coast, the glow of lamplight in an ancient hall, and the voice of a bard chanting stories of gods and heroes. These images remind us that history is not a distant archive, but a living current, flowing quietly beneath our lives. Tonight, we will let this current carry us, through Homer's verses, through Greece's rise and transformations, through centuries of memory and meaning. This is a journey into the heart of ancient Greece, a place where stories shape civilizations, and where the voice of a poet becomes the voice of a people. It is a journey that invites you to listen, to reflect, and to drift gently into knowledge, even as you drift towards sleep. As we begin our journey through Homer and ancient Greece, we must first step into the period that historians call the Greek Dark Age. This is the time that unfolds after the collapse of the great palatial civilizations of the Mycenaeans, around 1200 BCE. The Mycenaean world, with its fortified citadels like Mycenae and Tiryns, its rich grave goods, and its connections with the wider Mediterranean, fell into ruin. The reasons are still debated. Perhaps invasions, perhaps internal strife, perhaps natural disasters. But the result was unmistakable. Greece entered several centuries of decline in population, trade, and material wealth. Yet from this apparent darkness, something new and lasting began to take shape. Imagine the Greek mainland and islands around 1100 BCE. The great palaces are abandoned, their stones left to weather in the sun. Writing, which had been used by Mycenaean administrators in the form of linear B, disappears. Monumental architecture ceases. Pottery becomes simpler. Communities are smaller, and life is harder. A visitor might think that civilization itself had vanished. And yet, beneath the surface, traditions continue, and seeds are sown that will eventually sprout into the vibrant culture of Homer's epics. Daily life in this era is modest and intimate. Families tend small plots of land, growing barley, wheat, and olives. Herding is important, as sheep and goats provide both food and wool. Communities cluster in villages, often on defensible hilltops. Tools are simpler than before, with iron beginning to replace bronze, marking a technological shift. There is less long-distance trade, but exchange continues along coastlines and through local markets. Life is difficult, but it is sustained by cooperation, kinship, and the rhythms of nature. What keeps memory alive in this world is not written record, but spoken word. Storytelling is the glue that binds communities together. Around the hearth, by the flickering light of a fire, bards recite tales of gods and heroes. These tales recall a world of grandeur, the time of mighty warriors, of battles at Troy, of gods who intervened in human affairs. They are not history in the modern sense, but they are cultural memory, offering people a sense of identity and continuity. These poets, called aoidoi, weave verse in a rhythmic and formulaic style that allows them to compose long narratives on the spot. They use epithets, fixed phrases like swift-footed Achilles or rosy-fingered dawn to aid in memorization and recitation. These formulae are not simply poetic flourishes. They are part of an oral technique that enables epics to be performed across hours, even days. For centuries, these stories live only in memory and performance, carried from village to village by traveling bards. This oral tradition becomes the lifeline between the lost world of the Mycenaeans and the Greece of Homer. Within these tales, fragments of older reality survive. Descriptions of armor, chariot warfare, and monumental walls echo the Bronze Age past. At the same time, the values of these stories, honor, hospitality, bravery, cunning, speak to the needs of the Dark Age communities. In this way, the myths of Troy and Odysseus are both relics of an older time and reflections of a present reality. It is during the Greek Dark Age that the foundations of Homeric poetry are laid. By the 9th or 8th century BCE, Greece begins to recover. Population rises again. Trade routes reopen, particularly with the Near East. Pottery becomes more elaborate, with geometric patterns decorating amphorae and craters. Most importantly, the Greeks adapt the Phoenician alphabet into their own writing system. With this tool, oral tradition can finally be set down in written form. What had lived only in memory and performance can now endure on parchment. When the Iliad and the Odyssey are finally recorded, they crystallize centuries of oral tradition. Yet even in written form, their oral origins remain visible in the formulae, repetitions, and rhythms that shape the verses. The poems are vast tapestries woven from countless performances, and behind them we can sense the voices of generations of storytellers, stretching back to the shadowy years of the Dark Age. The Greek Dark Age, then, is not merely a period of decline. It is also a crucible in which Greek identity is reforged. Out of hardship arises resilience. Out of silence arises song. Out of loss arises memory, carried in the voice of the bard. By the time we encounter Homer, he is already the heir of this tradition, the culmination of centuries of oral poetry shaped by communities that refuse to let their past vanish. Let us pause for a moment and imagine such a gathering. A small village beneath the night sky, stars glittering above, the sea murmuring in the distance. Families sit close together as a bard begins to sing of the wrath of Achilles, of the wanderings of Odysseus, of gods and men entangled in destiny. The listeners are transported into a world larger than their own, a world that gives meaning to their struggles and dignity to their lives. These moments sustain them, and through them, the legacy of Greece is preserved. As we drift further, we see that the so-called Dark Age is less a time of darkness and more a time of preparation, a quiet dawn before the brightness of archaic and classical Greece. And within this dawn, Homer's voice begins to form, waiting to emerge and carry the memory of heroes into eternity. As the Greek Dark Age gradually gives way to renewal, we arrive at the birth of the Homeric epics themselves. This is the moment when the oral traditions of countless generations coalesce into the enduring poems we now know as the Iliad and the Odyssey. To understand how these works emerge, we must first picture the cultural environment of the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, a time when Greece begins to reconnect with the wider Mediterranean, and when the act of storytelling takes on a new permanence through the written word. By the 8th century, Greek society has entered what historians call the Archaic period. Populations are growing again, villages are expanding into towns, and trade routes stretch across the Aegean and into Asia Minor, the Levant, and beyond. It is in this revitalized world that oral traditions become not only performances of memory, but also foundations of identity. Communities seek continuity, and epic poetry provides it. The Ioidoi, or singers, remain central figures. Their skill lies not only in memorization, but in improvisation. Using formulaic phrases, stock epithets, and recurring scenes, they can weave long and intricate stories in hexameter verse. This oral formulaic style, studied in detail by modern scholars like Milman Parry and Albert Lord, reveals how such enormous poems could be composed without writing. Each performance is unique yet familiar, shaped by tradition and by the audience's expectations. In this way, the epics are both communal and fluid, passed along like a living flame. The turning point comes with the adoption of the alphabet. Around the 8th century BCE, the Greeks borrow and adapt the Phoenician script, creating a flexible writing system that allows them to record their language with remarkable precision. For the first time since the collapse of the Mycenaean world, the Greeks have writing capable of capturing poetry in full. It is in this era that someone, or perhaps several individuals, records the epics we attribute to Homer. The figure of Homer himself remains shrouded in mystery. Ancient sources describe him as a blind bard, wandering from town to town, reciting his verses in exchange for hospitality. Others imagine him as a teacher, a sage, or even a symbolic name representing a tradition rather than a person. Cities from Smyrna to Chios to Ionia lay claim to his birthplace, reflecting both his popularity and his elusive identity. What unites all these traditions is the sense that Homer embodies the voice of a collective memory, crystallized in human form. The Iliad and the Odyssey are not historical chronicles, but poetic masterpieces shaped by layers of myth and memory. The Iliad centers on a brief episode in the Trojan War, focusing on the wrath of Achilles and the tragic consequences of human pride. It is not a tale of victory, but of mortality, loss, and the fragile honor of warriors. The Odyssey, by contrast, is a tale of return. It follows Odysseus as he journeys home from Troy, facing storms, monsters, and temptations, yet always yearning for hearth and family. Together, the two epics form a mirror of human experience, one about the cost of war, the other about the challenge of homecoming. When these works are written down, they do not lose their oral flavor. Repetitions, set speeches, and rhythmic patterns remain, echoing the voice of the bard who once sang them aloud. They are not simply poems to be read, they are poems to be heard, and even today, their cadences carry the music of performance. The recording of Homer's works also reflects broader changes in Greek society. As city-states, or polis, begin to emerge, shared cultural anchors become vital. The epics serve as educational tools, teaching values of bravery, cunning, loyalty, and respect for the gods. They are recited at festivals and used in schools, shaping the moral imagination of generations. To know Homer is to be Greek, and his verses become the common inheritance of a diverse and scattered people. We should pause here to imagine such a performance in its early days. Picture a gathering at a festival in Ionia. The crowd assembles in an open courtyard as a bard begins to chant. His voice rises and falls, carrying the rhythm of hexameter across the air. He sings of heroes long gone, of Hector standing before Troy, of Odysseus braving the sea. The audience listens with rapt attention, recognizing in these tales not only entertainment, but identity, not only myth, but meaning. The debate about whether Homer was a single poet or a collective tradition may never be resolved. But what matters is that his works stand at the crossroads between oral and written culture. They preserve the artistry of countless generations of singers while also offering the permanence of text. They embody both continuity and innovation, both tradition and transformation. By the time of their recording, the Iliad and the Odyssey are already masterpieces honed by centuries of oral performance. Their survival into the written age ensures that they will not vanish with the memory of a single generation. Instead, they will endure, carried from the archaic age into the classical, and from antiquity into the modern world. As we drift further into the world of Homer, we recognize that these epics are more than poems. They are cultural foundations. They tell us about how Greeks understood heroism, fate, the gods, and the bonds of kinship. They also remind us that memory itself is fragile, dependent on voices willing to carry it forward. Homer is the voice that carries, the thread that binds past and present. And so as we rest with this thought, let us imagine the moment when words that had once lived only in the breath of the bard are fixed onto parchment. The ink dries, the verses endure, and Homer's voice becomes eternal. When we turn to the Iliad, we enter a world at once familiar and strange. It is familiar because the emotions and struggles it describes, anger, loss, honor, and grief, are deeply human and timeless. Yet it is strange because it belongs to an age of bronze weapons, divine interventions, and warriors who live and die for immortal fame. To fall asleep to the Iliad is to drift into the atmosphere of the Trojan War, a conflict both mythic and symbolic, where the clash of arms becomes a mirror for the condition of humanity itself. The Iliad does not tell the whole story of the Trojan War. Instead, it focuses narrowly on a brief moment in the 10th year of the fighting. Its subject is not the fall of Troy, nor the victory of the Greeks, but rather the wrath of Achilles. This choice is deliberate and profound. Rather than recounting an entire war, Homer leads us into the heart of a single human passion, anger, and shows us its consequences. The poem opens with the quarrel between Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, and Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek host. Agamemnon has taken a captive woman as his prize, but when forced to return her, he dishonors Achilles by seizing another. In response, Achilles withdraws from battle, refusing to fight. This absence changes the course of the war, leading to heavy losses for the Greeks. More importantly, it sets in motion a series of events that culminate in tragedy. At the center of the Iliad lies the tension between personal honor and collective need. For Achilles, pride and dignity are inseparable from his identity as a warrior. When his honor is insulted, he feels stripped of meaning. For Agamemnon, authority is paramount, and to yield would undermine his leadership. Their conflict is not merely personal. It reflects the fragile balance of power within the Greek army and the wider values of their society. The gods, too, are woven into this drama. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, and many others intervene, taking sides, guiding arrows, or stirring emotions. They act with human-like motives, jealousy, pride, love, yet their presence reminds us of the Greek belief that the divine is never far from human affairs. Battles are fought not only on the plain before Troy, but also in the realm of Olympus, where gods debate and scheme. One of the most poignant sections of the poem involves the friendship between Achilles and Patroclus. When the Greeks are suffering heavy losses, Patroclus dons Achilles' armor and leads the troops into battle. He fights bravely, but is slain by Hector, the prince of Troy. The news of his death shakes Achilles to his core. His wrath, once directed at Agamemnon, turns into grief and a desire for vengeance. He returns to the battlefield with ferocity, slaying Hector in single combat and dragging his body around the walls of Troy. The image is brutal, yet it captures the depth of Achilles' anguish. The Iliad closes not with Troy's fall, but with a moment of compassion. King Priam, Hector's father, comes in secret to Achilles' tent to beg for his son's body. In this extraordinary scene, two men who should be enemies sit together, united by their shared grief. Achilles, moved by Priam's plea, agrees to return Hector for burial. The poem ends with the funeral of Hector, tamer of horses, leaving us with a sense not of triumph but of the inevitability of loss. The Iliad reveals much about the values of Homer's world. Honor, time, and phlios are central, shaping the actions of warriors. Hospitality, Xenia, is sacred, binding hosts and guests in mutual respect. Fate, Moira, is unyielding, and even the greatest heroes cannot escape it. To live is to know that death will come, but also to seek meaning in the way one lives and dies. These values reflect the warrior culture of Greece's early centuries, yet they also speak to universal human concerns. Archaeological discoveries at sites like Troy in modern-day Turkey remind us that these stories may have roots in real events. The city of Troy shows evidence of destruction in the late Bronze Age, suggesting that some conflict occurred there. Yet Homer's Troy is more than history. It is myth, woven into poetry that transcends fact. The war becomes a stage on which the deepest questions of human existence are played out. As we drift through the Iliad, we are invited to reflect on anger, grief, and reconciliation. We see how pride can divide, how loss can transform, and how compassion can heal. The poem's grandeur lies not in its battles, but in its humanity. Even as gods and warriors clash, the heart of the story is the fragile bond between people, their longing for dignity, and their shared mortality. Let us pause with this image, the plain of Troy at dusk. The fighting has ceased for the day. Smoke rises gently from funeral pyres. Warriors sit weary in their camps, mending armor and recalling the fallen. In a tent nearby, Priam and Achilles share a quiet meal. Two men bound not by war but by sorrow. This is the music of the Iliad, a song of wrath, but also a song of compassion. If the Iliad speaks of war and wrath, the Odyssey sings of longing and return. Together, these two epics form a balance, one dwelling in the tragic cycle of battle, the other in the uncertain path homeward. The Odyssey invites us into a journey across seas and islands through storms and temptations, with a hero whose greatest weapons are not brute strength but endurance, cunning, and resilience. The Odyssey begins with Odysseus far from his home in Ithaca. The Trojan War has ended, but 10 years later he is still wandering, delayed by both divine wrath and human error. The gods themselves set the stage. Athena, goddess of wisdom, supports Odysseus, while Poseidon, god of the sea, opposes him. This divine conflict shapes the course of his travels, reminding us again of how Greeks saw the divine as deeply entwined with human fate. Odysseus's journey is not a straight line, but a series of trials. Each episode feels like a dream or a parable, rich with symbolic weight. On the island of the Lotus Eaters, his men taste a flower that makes them forget their homes, illustrating the dangers of losing one's purpose. With the Cyclops Polyphemus, Odysseus demonstrates his cunning by blinding the giant and escaping beneath the bellies of sheep. Yet his pride nearly undoes him, for he cannot resist boasting his name, provoking Poseidon's vengeance. The enchantress Circe transforms men into swine, yet Odysseus resists her spell and eventually wins her aid. The journey to the underworld is perhaps the most haunting episode, as Odysseus speaks to the shades of the dead, including the prophet Tiresias and his fallen comrades. Here, the poem reflects deeply on mortality, memory, and the cost of war. Later, Odysseus must sail past the sirens, whose voices promise irresistible knowledge. He orders his men to stop their ears with wax, while he himself is bound to the mast so he can hear without succumbing. The episode reminds us that curiosity and danger often walk in hand. He must also face Scylla and Charybdis, two sea monsters representing unavoidable peril. Sometimes survival requires choosing between two evils. One of the most poignant sections of the Odyssey is the stay on the island of Calypso, where the goddess offers Odysseus immortality if he will remain with her. Yet he refuses, yearning instead for his mortal wife, Penelope, and his homeland. This choice highlights one of the epic's central themes, the value of human bonds and ordinary life over eternal but isolated pleasures. Meanwhile, in Ithaca, Penelope endures her own trial. Believing Odysseus may be dead, she is besieged by suitors who consume her household's wealth and pressure her to remarry. With intelligence equal to her husband's, she delays them by weaving and unweaving a shroud each night, a subtle act of resistance that has become legendary. Their son, Telemachus, also grows into manhood during this time, searching for news of his father and learning what it means to lead. When Odysseus finally returns, it is not with trumpets or banners, but in disguise. He enters his own home as a beggar, testing the loyalty of servants and allies. With the help of Telemachus, he slays the suitors in a dramatic act of justice, restoring order to Ithaca. Yet the most moving moment comes not in battle, but in recognition. Penelope, cautious and wise, tests her husband by asking about their marriage bed, knowledge only Odysseus could possess. When he answers truly, their reunion is sealed, not by power, but by trust. The Odyssey is a poem about nostos, the Greek word for homecoming. It teaches that the journey matters as much as the destination, and that perseverance through hardship is itself a form of heroism. Unlike Achilles, who seeks glory in battle, Odysseus seeks the quiet dignity of home and family. His cunning, his patience, and his ability to endure suffering are celebrated as virtues equal to martial strength. This epic also reflects Greek values beyond the battlefield. Hospitality, xenia, is a constant theme. Hosts are judged by how they treat strangers, and guests by their respect for households. The gods favor those who uphold these sacred bonds and punish those who abuse them. Likewise, the tension between temptation and discipline is ever present. To be human is to face choices, and Odysseus shows both weakness and wisdom in navigating them. Let us pause to imagine one of these scenes. A small boat on a vast sea. Stars shimmering above, waves lapping gently at its sides. Odysseus stands at the prow, scanning the horizon, his thoughts torn between the dangers ahead and the image of Penelope waiting at the loom. The sea is wide, the journey long, but hope propels him forward. The Odyssey endures because it speaks not only of a hero, but of all of us. We may not battle cyclopes or resist sirens, but we all know the feeling of longing for home, the trials of endurance, and the joy of reunion. Its lessons whisper to us across centuries, to be steadfast, to be patient, to hold fast to what matters most. As we drift towards sleep, the Song of the Odyssey reminds us that journeys end not in glory, but in belonging, and that even the mightiest wanderer finds peace only when he comes home. To understand Homer fully, we must not only look at the sweeping poetry of his epics, but also the ordinary world they reflect. The Iliad and the Odyssey speak often of kings and warriors, of gods and monsters. But beneath their verses, we glimpse the rhythms of everyday existence in early Greece. These details, about farming, food, houses, tools, and rituals, bring us closer to the lived reality of the people who first heard these stories. As we drift through Homer's Greece, we enter a society simple in its means, yet rich in tradition and imagination. Daily life in Homer's time revolves around the household, or oikos. This is not just a family home, but an economic and social unit, the center of work, wealth, and identity. An oikos typically includes the extended family, servants, slaves, and land. Men work the fields, tend livestock, and handle warfare, while women manage the household, weave textiles, and oversee food preparation. In a world without large cities or centralized governments, the household is both refuge and foundation. Agriculture provides the base of survival. Farmers cultivate grains such as barley and wheat, which are ground into flour for bread. Olives are pressed for oil, both for cooking and for lamps, while grapes are turned into wine. Herding is also central. Sheep and goats provide wool, milk, and cheese, while cattle serve as markers of wealth and prestige. In Homer's epics, cattle are often counted as treasures, given as bride wealth, or offered in sacrifice to the gods. The sound of bells around the necks of herds must have been as familiar to Greeks then as the crackling of hearth fires. The home itself is simple but functional. Most houses are built of mud brick with wooden beams, often centered around a hearth. The hearth is more than a place of cooking. It is sacred, dedicated to Hestia, goddess of the household flame. Around the hearth, families gather for meals and for storytelling. The glow of firelight illuminates not only food, but also memory, for it is here that bards sing of heroes and ancestors. Meals in Homer's Greece are modest but communal. Bread, cheese, olives, and wine form staples, while meat is rarer and often associated with feasting. Hunting provides venison or wild boar, but large-scale slaughter of livestock is reserved for festivals or sacrifices. Hospitality, or xenia, is a vital custom, and meals are often shared with strangers. Guests are offered bread and wine before any questions are asked, for to care for the traveler is to honor the gods themselves. Zeus, protector of strangers, watches over these sacred exchanges. Craftsmanship is another window into this society. Blacksmiths, potters, and weavers play essential roles. The blacksmith transforms raw metal into tools, weapons, and ornaments, his work carrying both practical and symbolic power. Potters shape clay into amphorae and craters for storing and mixing wine. Women skilled in weaving create cloth on looms, often dyed with deep blues and reds. These crafts provide not only necessities, but also markers of identity, wealth, and tradition. Religion saturates daily life. The Greeks of Homer's age live with a constant awareness of the divine. Sacrifices are made before journeys, prayers whispered before planting, offerings given before meals. The gods are believed to influence everything, from the outcome of wars to the yield of crops, and rituals are ways of maintaining balance. Yet alongside the Olympian gods, there are local spirits of rivers, fields, and households. To live in Homer's Greece is to live in a world alive with presence, where every action is shadowed by the divine. The Iliad and the Odyssey reflect these customs vividly. In the Odyssey, we see Penelope weaving by day and unraveling by night. In both epics, we hear detailed descriptions of sacrifices, feasts, and hospitality. In the Iliad, warriors pause between battles to eat bread and roast meat, poured over with wine. In the Odyssey, Odysseus encounters hosts who embody both extremes of hospitality, from the generous Phaeacians who send him home with gifts to the monstrous Cyclops who devours his guests. These contrasts remind us of the sacred weight of everyday customs. Social structure in Homer's Greece is hierarchical but personal. Kings and nobles lead communities, but their power depends on persuasion, gifts, and charisma rather than strict law. Warriors follow leaders out of loyalty and expectation of honor. Wealth is measured not only in land and cattle, but also in prestige objects such as bronze tripods or ornate armor. Yet beneath these elites lies the foundation of ordinary people, farmers, shepherds, artisans, whose labor sustains the whole. We should not forget the role of women. Though rarely central in the epics, women are keepers of continuity. Penelope embodies patience and fidelity. Nausicaa in the Odyssey shows hospitality and grace. Even Helen, whose beauty sparks the Trojan War, represents both peril and longing. Women weave, manage households, and sometimes guide decisions, shaping society from within. Their labor and wisdom ensure the survival of families through war and uncertainty. Education in this world is not formal but experiential. Children learn by doing, boys following fathers into the fields or onto the battlefield, girls learning weaving and household skills from mothers. Storytelling by elders and griot-like bards teaches values, memory, and identity. The epics themselves serve as lessons. Achilles shows the cost of anger, Odysseus the value of cunning, Penelope the strength of patience. Let us pause to picture a day in Homer's Greece. Morning begins with the sound of roosters and the movement of cattle to pasture. Farmers bend over fields as the sun warms the earth. Children carry water from the well in clay jars. By evening, the hearth glows, meals are shared, and songs echo into the night. In this rhythm of work and rest, the culture of Greece persists, quiet yet enduring. Through these glimpses of daily life, we see that Homer's epics are not only tales of gods and heroes, but also mirrors of a living world. They remind us that behind every myth are people, sewing, weaving, feasting, mourning, and hoping. This balance of grandeur and ordinariness gives Homer's poetry its timeless depth. As we drift further into the story, let us hold this image, a hearth glowing in the dark, a family gathered, a bard's voice rising and falling like waves upon the shore. Here is Homer's Greece, not only a stage for heroes, but a home for the human spirit. From the quiet rhythms of household life, we now shift to one of the great transformations of ancient Greece, the rise of the polis, or city-state. If the Homeric world is shaped by oikos, households bound together by kinship and tradition, the archaic and classical eras bring forth a new kind of community, larger, more complex, and more organized. The polis becomes not only a place of residence, but also a political, religious, and cultural entity. To fall asleep to this part of the story is to witness the birth of a social experiment that still echoes in our world today. The word polis means both city and community. It is not simply a cluster of houses or a walled town. It is a collective identity, a gathering of citizens who share laws, customs, and sacred spaces. Each polis is independent, with its own government, army, and traditions. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and many others become names remembered through history. But in their time, each is simply one among hundreds of city-states that dot the Greek world. The rise of the polis begins in the 8th century BCE, around the same time Homer's epics take written form. As populations grow and agriculture expands, communities gather in central places for defense, trade, and worship. Hills often serve as natural fortresses, acropolis, or high cities, where temples are built and citizens can retreat in times of danger. Around these high points, markets, homes, and assembly spaces develop. Slowly, the polis takes shape as a structured and enduring form of life. Politics in the polis vary widely. In some, kingship survives in limited form, while in others, aristocrats hold power. Over time, new systems emerge: oligarchy, rule by a few; tyranny, rule by one; and democracy, rule by the people. Athens becomes famous for experimenting with democracy, where free male citizens gather in assemblies to vote on laws and policies. Sparta, by contrast, develops a unique system focused on military discipline, with dual kingship and councils balancing power. Though diverse, all polis share the idea that citizens have responsibilities to their community. Religion plays a vital role in the life of the polis. Each city honors particular gods as its patrons. Athens venerates Athena, goddess of wisdom, while Sparta looks to Artemis, Orthia, and Apollo. Temples and festivals provide moments of unity where citizens gather not only for worship, but also for competition, feasting, and storytelling. The Olympic Games, first held in 776 BCE, are one of the clearest examples of how religion, sport, and community intertwine. Athletes compete in honor of Zeus, but the Games also serve as a meeting ground for Greeks from across the Aegean, reinforcing a sense of shared identity. Economy, too, flourishes within the polis. Markets, or agoras, become central spaces where goods are exchanged, news is spread, and ideas circulate. Farmers bring produce, artisans display wares, and traders from afar introduce exotic goods. The agora is not only economic, but also social. It is the heartbeat of the polis, where citizens debate, bargain, and connect. In this way, daily life blends seamlessly with civic life. The rise of the polis also encourages colonization. As populations grow and resources strain, Greeks sail outward, founding colonies along the coasts of Italy, Sicily, North Africa, and the Black Sea. These colonies carry with them Greek language, religion, and culture, spreading Hellenic influence far beyond the mainland. Yet they also adapt to local contexts, blending Greek traditions with those of the peoples they encounter. This outward movement ensures that the world of Homer, once confined to the Aegean, becomes part of a wider Mediterranean network. The polis also transforms the nature of warfare. In Homer's time, battles are depicted as duels between heroes, where individual valor dominates. In the age of the polis, warfare becomes collective. The hoplite phalanx, a formation of heavily armed infantrymen with shields and spears, becomes the standard of Greek combat. Discipline, unity, and cooperation are now as important as personal bravery. Each citizen soldier stands shoulder to shoulder, protecting his neighbor, embodying the principle that the strength of the community outweighs the strength of the individual. Education and culture flourish in this environment. Poetry, drama, and philosophy find fertile ground in the polis, where citizens value debate, performance, and reflection. Public festivals showcase plays by dramatists like Aeschylus and Sophocles. Philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle later emerge in Athens, asking questions about justice, virtue, and the nature of reality itself. All of these intellectual achievements trace their roots back to the rise of the polis, which creates the structures and spaces for communal dialogue. The polis is not without limitations. Citizenship is restricted, usually to free men of native descent. Women, foreigners, and slaves are excluded from political participation, though they contribute deeply to social and economic life. This exclusion reminds us that even as Greece pioneers ideas of democracy and community, its freedoms are bounded by narrow definitions. Let us pause to imagine a day in Athens, one of the most famous polis. The sun rises over the Acropolis, its temples catching the morning light. Farmers arrive at the agora with baskets of figs and olives. Artisans hammer bronze in their workshops. Citizens gather in the assembly, raising their hands to vote on new laws. In the evening, families ascend the hill to offer sacrifice to Athena, their voices mingling in prayer. This is the rhythm of the polis, daily life and civic duty intertwined, individual and community bound together. The rise of the polis marks a turning point in Greek history. From the scattered villages of the Dark Age, a new form of social organization emerges, one that values shared identity, public space, and collective responsibility. The epics of Homer provide a cultural foundation, but the polis gives that culture a physical and political shape. As we drift from this chapter, let us carry the image of the polis as both home and experiment, a place where ordinary people come together to build extraordinary traditions, where the seeds of democracy and philosophy are first planted, and where the echoes of Homer's songs find a civic chorus. From the rise of the polis, we move now into the sacred spaces that gave ancient Greece its heartbeat of faith and ritual. To live in Homer's world, and in the centuries that follow, is to exist within a landscape alive with gods, spirits, and sacred traditions. Religion in Greece is not confined to temples or priests, but woven into every act of life, from farming and warfare to marriage and storytelling. Tonight, let us wander gently through sanctuaries like Delphi and Olympia, listening to the voices of worshippers and the quiet presence of gods that never seemed far away. The Greek gods are many, and each carries human traits: anger, jealousy, love, laughter. Yet they are not distant. They dwell on Mount Olympus, but also walk among mortals, guiding or obstructing them. Zeus rules the skies. Hera watches over marriage. Athena protects wisdom and warcraft. Poseidon commands the seas, and Apollo shines light through music and prophecy. These deities are at once powerful and relatable, shaping the moral and emotional imagination of the Greeks. In Homer's epics, the gods are everywhere. In the Iliad, Athena restrains Achilles from striking Agamemnon in anger, while Apollo guides the arrow that strikes a Greek leader. In the Odyssey, Athena shepherds Odysseus home, while Poseidon stirs the seas against him. These divine interventions remind listeners that fate is not only human choice, but also divine will. For the Greeks, the gods embody the unpredictability of life, sometimes supportive, sometimes cruel, always present. Sanctuaries are the earthly homes of these gods. Delphi, nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, becomes the most famous oracle of the ancient world. Here, worshippers from across Greece come to consult Apollo through the voice of the Pythia, a priestess who delivers cryptic prophecies. Kings and generals, farmers and traders alike seek guidance, offering gifts of gold, bronze, and fine goods. The sacred path leading to Apollo's temple glitters with dedications, reminders of how faith and politics intertwine. Olympia, by contrast, is sacred to Zeus. Every 4 years, Greeks gather here for the Olympic Games, a festival blending sport, religion, and unity. Athletes compete in running, wrestling, discus, and chariot racing, their bodies glistening in the sun as crowds cheer. Yet the games are not merely athletic contests, they are acts of devotion. Sacrifices are offered at Zeus's great altar, and victory is seen as a sign of divine favor. Even wars are paused for the sacred truce that allows competitors safe passage. Other sanctuaries also shape the landscape. At Eleusis, near Athens, secret rites honored Demeter and Persephone, offering initiates hope of blessings in the afterlife. At Dodona, worshippers listen to the rustling leaves of Zeus's sacred oak for signs of his will. Everywhere, temples rise with columns and altars, blending artistry with devotion. These sanctuaries are not remote. They are living centers of pilgrimage, memory, and shared identity. Religion also infuses household life. Each family tends a small altar at the hearth, where offerings of wine or grain are given to Hestia, goddess of the flame. Travelers pour libations to Hermes before setting out on journeys. Farmers sacrifice at planting and harvest, asking the gods for favor. Marriage, childbirth, and death are all marked with prayers, rituals, and sacrifices. In this way, the divine touches every stage of life, binding people together in shared custom. The Greeks also practice rituals of sacrifice and feasting. Animals, often cattle or goats, are offered to the gods, their meat shared among the community. Such feasts reinforce bonds between humans and gods, as well as between families and neighbors. Music, dance, and song accompany these rituals, creating a tapestry of devotion and celebration. Homer's epics are filled with such scenes, reminding us that piety is as much about joy and togetherness as about solemnity. The role of religion extends into politics and identity. City-states define themselves by their patron deities. Athens honors Athena. Corinth venerates Poseidon. Sparta dedicates itself to Artemis Orthia. Civic festivals, funded by the Polis, bring citizens together in worship and spectacle. In Athens, the Panathenaic festival celebrates Athena with processions, sacrifices, and contests of music and poetry. These festivals create shared memory, binding individuals into a collective whole. We might pause here to imagine one such festival. The sun sets as torches illuminate a procession through the streets of Athens. Priests, musicians, and citizens march toward the Acropolis, bearing offerings of oil, cloth, and garlands. At the temple, sacrifices are made, music fills the air, and the crowd joins in prayer. The night hums with devotion, joy, and awe. For a moment, the city feels united not only with itself but with the divine. Faith in Greece is not about a single scripture or centralized authority, but about tradition, practice, and community. It provides explanation for natural forces, justification for laws, and comfort in uncertainty. Above all, it gives rhythm to life. Festivals in the summer, harvest rituals in autumn, sacrifices before journeys or wars. For Homer's audience, the gods are not abstract. They are woven into every moment, shaping how people see themselves and their world. As we drift away from the sanctuaries of Greece, let us hold the image of Delphi's oracle, of Olympia's games, of household hearths glowing with devotion. These are the places where the human and the divine meet, where prayer and song echo into the night, and where the legacy of faith sustains the heart of the Greek world. As we drift further into the story of Homer in ancient Greece, we begin to see how his legacy shapes the centuries that follow. Homer's epics are not preserved as distant relics. They become living texts, guiding the imagination, morals, and identity of classical Greece. From drama performed in Athenian theaters, to philosophical dialogues in the Agora, to the careful histories written by Herodotus and Thucydides, Homer's influence stretches like a thread across Greek culture. To listen closely is to hear echoes of his voice in every corner of later Greek achievement. In the archaic and classical periods, Homer's poems are recited not just in private gatherings, but in public festivals. The Panathenaic festival in Athens, held in honor of the goddess Athena, features rhapsodes, professional performers, who chant portions of the Iliad and the Odyssey. For citizens, hearing these verses is more than entertainment. It is a civic ritual, reinforcing shared values of bravery, hospitality, and reverence for the gods. Homer becomes a teacher for all, his poetry serving as a kind of cultural curriculum. Philosophers respond to Homer with both admiration and critique. Plato, in his Republic, questions whether the portrayals of the gods in Homer should be taught to the young, since the gods sometimes behave with jealousy, deception, or cruelty. Yet even in questioning, Plato acknowledges Homer's central role in shaping Greek education. Aristotle, more pragmatic, studies Homer's structure and narrative skill, noting how he weaves unity out of sprawling tales. Both recognize that Homer provides the foundation upon which later philosophy must build, whether in agreement or debate. The dramatists of Athens also owe much to Homer. Tragedies by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides often revisit themes and characters from the epics. Aeschylus reportedly described his own plays as slices from the banquet of Homer, acknowledging the poet as the source of inspiration. The Iliad's focus on anger and fate resonates in tragedies like Ajax and Philoctetes. The Odyssey's themes of longing and recognition find new life in plays like Helen or Medea. Through drama, Homer's stories are refracted into new forms, offering fresh reflections for audiences. Historians, too, take cues from Homer. Herodotus, often called the father of history, writes in the 5th century BCE, weaving together stories of wars, travels, and customs of foreign peoples. Though his methods differ from poetry, the impulse to tell a sweeping narrative of human events echoes Homeric tradition. Thucydides, more rigorous in his analysis of the Peloponnesian War, still writes with the gravity and cadence of epic, giving his history the weight of timeless memory. Both carry forward the idea that to write is to preserve human experience for generations to come. Beyond literature, Homer shapes values of identity and education. Greek boys learn to recite passages, absorbing lessons about courage, loyalty, and cunning. Achilles becomes the model of heroic strength, though tempered with the warning of pride's dangers. Odysseus embodies resourcefulness, showing how wit and patience can overcome force. Penelope, with her weaving and fidelity, exemplifies endurance and wisdom. These figures become more than characters. They are moral exemplars, part of the cultural fabric. Art and sculpture also reflect Homeric themes. Vase paintings from the archaic and classical periods often depict scenes from the Trojan War or Odysseus's adventures. Achilles slaying Hector, Ajax carrying the body of Achilles, Odysseus blinding the Cyclops. These images translate the poetry into visual form, allowing even those who cannot read or hear recitations to participate in the shared mythos. Education in classical Greece, the Paideia, includes Homer as a cornerstone. Students memorize lines, analyze speeches, and learn meter and style. Teachers use Homer to teach language, ethics, and memory. In this way, Homer is not only a poet, but a perpetual instructor, shaping the minds of citizens across centuries. We should pause to imagine an Athenian classroom. A young boy sits on a wooden bench, a wax tablet in his lap. His teacher recites a passage from the Iliad, perhaps Achilles grieving for Patroclus. The boy repeats the lines, his voice tentative but growing stronger. Around him, other students murmur the same verses, the sound rising like a chorus. In this moment, Homer's poetry becomes not just ancient memory, but living speech, passed from one generation to the next. Homer's influence also crosses into philosophy of aesthetics. The harmony of his verses, the balance of action and reflection, inspire ideas about beauty, order, and narrative unity. Aristotle's Poetics looks to Homer as a model of how epic structure should work, noting his ability to begin in the middle, in medias res, to focus on a single theme, and to create dramatic tension. These insights echo far beyond Greece, shaping later literature in Rome and Europe. Through drama, philosophy, art, and education, Homer is not merely preserved, he is transformed, integrated into every part of Greek identity. His epics cease to be just stories of the past. They become tools for reflection on present life, guides for future action, and symbols of shared belonging. As we drift gently from this chapter, let us hold the image of Athens at its height. Theaters alive with Homeric echoes, philosophers debating his lessons, artists painting his heroes, children reciting his verses. Homer's voice flows like a river through the heart of classical Greece, carrying with it both the memory of the past and the promise of wisdom yet to come. As our journey reaches its final stage, we pause to reflect on the enduring legacy of Homer and ancient Greece. Empires rise and fall, cities crumble, and languages change, but Homer's voice continues to echo through time. His epics are not only the foundation of Greek identity, they become part of the shared heritage of humanity. To drift into this legacy is to see how stories endure across centuries, shaping memory, imagination, and meaning for countless generations. The immediate legacy of Homer lies in Greece itself. For the Greeks, the Iliad and the Odyssey are more than poetry. They are a cultural scripture. In an age without a single sacred text, Homer provides a common foundation of values and myths. The epics teach what it means to be heroic, to endure suffering, to honor the gods, and to respect the bonds of hospitality. They become the starting point for Greek education, art, and philosophy. Through them, Greeks across distant Polis recognize a shared culture, despite political divisions. But Homer's influence does not end in Greece. When the Romans rise to power, they adopt Greek literature as their own. Virgil's Aeneid, written in the 1st century BCE, is a direct response to Homer. It tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero who journeys to Italy, blending echoes of the Iliad and the Odyssey into Rome's founding myth. Roman authors like Ovid and Horace also look to Homer as the model of epic storytelling, weaving his themes into their own works. In this way, Homer's voice shapes not only Greece but also Rome, the empire that carries Greek culture into Europe and beyond. In the Middle Ages, Homer's texts survive through careful preservation. Byzantine scholars copy and comment on the epics, ensuring their survival even as the Western Roman Empire collapses. In monasteries and schools, Homer is studied as both a poet and a moral guide. Though often read through Christian lenses, his works remain central to education. When the Renaissance dawns in Europe, Homer is rediscovered with fresh eyes, inspiring painters, sculptors, and writers who see in his verses the grandeur of antiquity. By the modern era, Homer becomes a universal figure. Scholars debate the Homeric question: was he one man or a tradition of singers? Was he from Ionia, Chios, or Smyrna? These debates matter less than the recognition that his poetry embodies centuries of collective memory. Archaeological discoveries at Troy, Mycenae, and elsewhere add depth to our understanding, reminding us that behind the myths are layers of historical reality. Yet even without answers to every question, Homer's epics continue to speak to readers across cultures. His influence also extends into art and literature worldwide. Dante, Milton, Goethe, Joyce, each in their own way converses with Homer. James Joyce's Ulysses, a modern epic of one day in Dublin, mirrors the structure of the Odyssey, showing how ancient myths can still frame modern life. Painters depict Achilles, Odysseus, and Helen across centuries, their images shifting with each age's imagination. Composers set Homeric themes to music, while filmmakers reimagine the Trojan War for new audiences. The epics are endlessly adaptable, their themes of wrath, longing, and endurance remaining ever relevant. Beyond art, Homer shapes our understanding of the human condition. His heroes are not flawless demigods, but men and women marked by pride, grief, cunning, and resilience. Achilles teaches us the cost of anger and the inevitability of mortality. Odysseus shows us the strength of perseverance and the yearning for home. Penelope embodies loyalty and patience, while Hector reminds us of courage even in defeat. These characters endure because they speak to truths that transcend time and place. The legacy of ancient Greece itself also persists. The Polis gives us models of democracy, civic duty, and debate. Greek philosophy asks questions still relevant to ethics, politics, and science. Greek art and architecture inspire buildings and aesthetics across the world. Yet within this vast legacy, Homer remains central, the voice that first gave form to memory, identity, and imagination. Let us imagine now the journey of Homer's words through time. In an Athenian festival, rhapsodes chant his verses to a crowd gathered beneath the Acropolis. In a Roman villa, Virgil reads aloud passages that echo Homer's rhythms. In a Byzantine scriptorium, a monk copies Homer's lines by lamplight, ensuring their survival for another generation. In a Renaissance study, a scholar translates Homer into a modern tongue, marveling at the power of his voice. And today, in classrooms, libraries, and even in quiet recordings made for sleep, Homer's words still live. The endurance of Homer reminds us of the power of story. Civilizations may fade, but stories carry forward their essence. They teach, comfort, inspire, and question. They bridge the distance between past and present, between one culture and another. In this sense, Homer is not only a poet of Greece, but a poet of humanity. As we close this journey, let us rest with a final image: the Aegean Sea at twilight, its waters calm, its horizon endless. Somewhere on a distant shore, a bard sits by a fire, singing of Achilles, Odysseus, and the gods. His voice rises into the night, carried by memory, preserved in verse. That voice reaches us still, reminding us that the search for meaning, the longing for home, and the struggle for honor are eternal parts of the human story. Homer and ancient Greece live not in ruins or relics alone, but in the stories we continue to tell. And as we drift into sleep, we carry with us the comfort that history is never lost. It is remembered, sung, and shared across centuries like a gentle flame.